because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. A favorite Martin Luther King Jr. quote was, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. The idea is that positive social change takes decades or even generations, but it comes about eventually. Eventually, it comes about. The psalmist's cry is one of longing. It's one of ache. It's one of deep pain. It's a moan that cannot really find its expression in words, and it brings almost on hopelessness. How long? How long will this go on? The moral arc of the universe is not linear, although we wish it were, and it is often interrupted. It sputters at times. It starts, it stops, it's here and there, but not there or here. It sometimes diverts, and we have seen it over the past few years even reverse its course. But one of the ways that we've seen it reverse its course is that long believed hatreds that we thought were behind us have now resurfaced, and they've reemerged themselves with a ferocious ugliness and power that seems to reject the moral arc of justice of the universe from bending towards justice, where there is equality and where there is a sense of inclusiveness and justice for all. In my conference, when I sent a letter to the conference last Friday, just kind of reflecting on where we were, and I said, last a couple of weeks ago, we were focusing on the COVID death clock and on the search for a vaccine and on the reopening of our states at different phases to allow people to resume gathering. But then overnight, the focus shifted to the reaction to the death of George Floyd. And all of a sudden, COVID seems to be in the back burner. And I was thinking that, in a week or 2 weeks, something else will happen in our world, and the camera lenses will focus on that. But the issue of racism, of underlying racism, systemic racism, and oppression is not going to go away. So how do we keep our focus on that when everyone's attention is now shifted elsewhere? And I asked the conference to move beyond trite prayers, platitudes, Bible studies, giving out lists of books to read and debating about justice as a topic, but actually move more into some concrete actions that then expresses, change for people. Excuse me, I got my grandkids next to me. I got 4 grandkids in the home, and so they're kind of noisy. So if you hear them in the background, that's them. So we're going to take a truth and reconciliation process so that we can name and address some of those issues that are there in our communities. With the idea of helping people find an equal footing in whatever communities they're at. One of the classic texts for doing justice is, of course, in the Exodus, the book of Exodus. And it's an interesting story because, Moses is going about his business, tending the sheep up in Midian, when he encounters God, and God says to Moses, I've observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt, and I've heard their cries on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their suffering, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians. And I'm sending you. And then, of course, Moses begins all of his excuse making, right? Who am I? I don't have an army and all these kinds of things. And I think Moses was not really concerned so much about following through on what God had called him to do. I think it was just his coming to grips with how much this was going to disrupt his life. And he was doing all that he could so that his life wouldn't be disrupted, and he wouldn't have to assume that responsibility. But he did, and I think this is a time that calls us for a disruption of our lives for the sake of the other. The thing about the Exodus is that, and given that context, the Egyptians were not going to readily give up power to the Hebrews in that context. They were not going to make room in the classroom or the higher educational opportunities for the Hebrews. They were not going to allow seats at the decision-making table for the Hebrews. They were not going to help Hebrews with conventional loans or venture capital, or to buy housing or to develop. And they were definitely not going to give up positions of leadership and power. At the end of the day, it was a matter of who's got power and who doesn't. And so the only option for the Hebrews was to leave and start over. People in the U.S. don't have that opportunity, and they don't even have that desire. They want to stay here, but in order for justice to happen, there's going to have to be an equitable distribution of power and goods and resources, and that's never easy. And that's always what is at the bottom of all of these issues of justice and injustice and institutional racism, is who's got power, who doesn't, and how do those in power sustain power. So we moved into a Darwinian ecosphere, cultural ecosphere, where the strongest survive. And so the work ahead of us is not going to be easy. We would hope that reasoned people would understand what the stakes are, and that they would, by reason, acknowledge that this is where we need to move. But self-interest is very hard to lay aside, especially when the system benefits you and you have privileges because of it. So I just applaud the work of DART and work and all those that are joining together, and all our ecumenical partners. And I trust that together we will find a way to help that moral arc of the universe bend towards justice. There's a prayer by Cardinal John Dearden that he preached in Detroit in 1979 at a homily for the departed priests, and it was really a homily for Oscar Romero in Salvador and others. And he said, basically he said, no project will ever accomplish God's mission. No program will ever accomplish the church's mission. No pastoral visit is ever complete. But nevertheless, we're moving towards that kingdom that Christ promised us. And so I'm just blessed to walk this road with you. I look forward to meeting you, many of you in person. I'm away from my area right now, but I look forward when I return to meeting with the Kansas City group and others throughout our Great Plains Conference, and meeting other Episcopal leaders and other people that are interested in doing justice in the world. So the grace and peace of Jesus Christ be with you.
Hi, my name is Shanae Holman. I serve as lead organizer in Topeka, Kansas, Topeka and Shawnee County. I'm a part of the local elder team in my congregation at El Shaddai Ministries Community Church, and I have been organizing in the DART network for 11 years. I actually grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and what I want to share with you today is the biblical inspiration for building powerful justice ministry organizations that help us live out what Bishop Saenz so eloquently presented to us as a real call to do justice. So the inspiration for building justice ministry organizations comes from two scriptures in the Bible. The first one is found in the Hebrew Bible. It is Micah 6:8. And that scripture says, he has shown thee, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Now, the second scripture is found in the New Testament. It echoes those same three mandates in Matthew chapter 23, verses 23 and 24. And it says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, but have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. Our faith communities use the biblical text really as a mirror. And so if we were to do that with those three scriptures, what you would find is a process of thinking about the ways in which your ministry or your faith community lines up to those three mandates: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So in faithfulness ministry, you find things that you do to encourage your walk with God. This reminds us to be faithful, right? And so weekly services and prayer meetings and retreats and Bible study, the music ministry, those are all things that we do to take care of God's house of worship and to be faithful. We typically do a pretty good job of the faithfulness mandate that Micah outlines. Now, if you look at mercy ministry, that second mandate in the text, you think about the programs that help individuals in need. That's what mercy ministry refers to. Another word for that might be charity. Programs to help individuals in need. And so if you use the text as a mirror and you look at your reflection, what you'll be able to name are things like feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, ministering to those in prison, right? Tutoring children. Those are the types of things that we do to meet that mercy mandate. And then, of course, there's justice. And the Old Testament prophets teach us that justice is holding the king and other officials accountable to the fair treatment of all people, especially the poor, the widow, and the orphan. We follow the biblical example by holding our mayor, our city council members, the school board, and other decision makers accountable to justice. And so examples of doing that result in getting curriculums where children are reading at grade level, holding the criminal justice system accountable to reducing recidivism. These are the types of things that you can do in the process of seeking justice. And so how do our faith communities hold up to holding city and county leaders accountable? Well, I think in general, we tend to do poorly on this justice requirement because the systems are big and they're powerful, and we're not able to hold them accountable by ourselves. We're not able to do that work alone. So while we do well in faithfulness ministry and we do well in mercy ministry, what we tend to find generally is that this justice mandate needs work in our local faith traditions. And I suspect that that's why you're on this call today. We don't do justice well because we cannot do it alone. We need power to deal with powerful systems. And in our society, we've seen over and over again that power really comes from two sources: organized money or organized people. Nehemiah provides a biblical example of how to build and exercise power. It's found in the book of Nehemiah. And here, what we know is that Nehemiah is cupbearer to the king of Persia. He goes to his homeland, Jerusalem, to restore the people's identity by rebuilding walls around the city. And while he is there, the people cry out to him. There's a famine in the land, and the people are being forced to borrow money and to buy food and to pay taxes. And when the people couldn't repay their loans, the nobles and officials took everything. their fields, their vineyards, their orchards. They even forced their children into slavery to repay their debts. So the people are crying out to Nehemiah, and the scripture says that he got angry and he thought about what he should do. Now, Nehemiah essentially had two choices. He could do mercy ministry and open up a food pantry or do some credit counseling, if you will, or he could do justice and hold the nobles and officials accountable for fairness. And that was Nehemiah's choice. It's right there in the text, Nehemiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 13. That was Nehemiah's choice. And even though he had status as cupbearer to the king of Persia, he knew that that wasn't enough. He needed to build power. And so verse 7 in that story tells us that he organized a great assembly of people and brought the nobles and the officials before it. He knew there was power in numbers. So when pressed during this assembly, the nobles and the officials agreed to restore everything that they had taken from the people, and they followed through. They did as they had promised. That's in the book. That's in the text. So to do justice, we must do like Nehemiah and build our capacity to organize great assemblies in our local communities. The vision of justice ministry organizations is for congregations to join together around their common call to do justice, and to have each congregation bring their average worship or average weekly attendance out at least once a year to what we call a Nehemiah Action Assembly. That's the vision, that congregations join together around the common call to do justice, bring out all the folks that sit in a chair or a pew at a great Nehemiah Action Assembly once a year. Now listen, the challenge is going back to those mandates. We turn out our average weekly worship attendance 52 times a year. We do faithfulness ministry at least 52 times a year. And if you're a member of El Shaddai Ministries, we do it double that for sure. And so JUMP challenges its member congregations to come together once a year with that same level of commitment at the Nehemiah Action Assembly. That's the challenge before you as we build justice ministry organizations. In summary, scripture tells us that we are required to do justice as well as mercy and faithfulness ministries. There's not an or in that scripture. It says justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And Nehemiah shows us how to join together and act powerfully to challenge injustices in our cities. The more lines we cross to come together and the more organized each of our congregations become, the more powerful we as believers can be to ensure our cities are the cities of God where justice flows down like a mighty river, no matter what the challenge is that comes before us. We have an obligation to accept God's invitation to do the work. I'm excited you all are on this call today.
Thanks, Shanae. For those of you, Shanae, I'm going to keep you there because I'm going to go through one of our examples here of our work at Justice Matters, and then allow Shanae to kind of share a little bit about some of the examples that she has just real quickly before we move into discussions. My name's Ben MacConnell. I'm the lead organizer with Justice Matters, a justice ministry organization in Douglas County. Most of you might know it as the Lawrence community. And we are, I'm also working with the Great Plains Conference on the Doing Justice Initiative by growing the work of justice ministry in Johnson County and Wyandotte County, which is one of the reasons we've drawn you here today. So I'm going to walk you through rather quickly a case study. And what does this actually look like, a justice ministry organization? And I'm going to use, we could use a multitude of different examples, but we're going to go ahead and I'm going to provide you our mass incarceration and mental health campaign as the example that I'll be working on. So the process by which justice ministry organizations work is that we first start by listening and identifying leaders within your congregations to understand what are the cries of our people. And then secondly, we engage your leaders from your congregation and clergy in understanding the scale and scope of the problem, as well as defining viable solutions. And then the third step that we take is what we call biblical action. We use the Nehemiah chapter 5 example that Shanae was talking about, organizing large numbers of people to present solutions that work to those authorities that have the power to make those decisions. And then we monitor to ensure that the impact that we sought from the beginning is actually making its way down to the people in which we care and love. So I'm going to talk about the mental health campaign and just start first by letting you know that we began this campaign with 1,400 people meeting in small groups over the course of 6 weeks. So if you have a small group ministry that meets on a regular basis, you can kind of imagine what this might look like. It's people sitting in their living rooms or in their kitchen table with neighbors and friends and family and members of their faith communities. And they're wrestling, however, with this one question: what keeps you up at night? And in a matter of 6 weeks, with over 120 small groups, with 21 different congregations participating, we had over 1,400 people wrestling with that question. And they, regardless of what part of town you lived in, what denomination you were with, we repeatedly kept hearing the problem of mental illness, mental illness, mental illness. We established a research committee to look into this, and we had about 75 people investigating what is the scale and scope of the problem around mental illness in our community. And what I would consider the symptoms of a crisis started to appear. Our police were describing on average 8 mental health calls per shift. Those who were seeking psychiatric help were talking about a 6 to 8 week lag time. Osawatomie State Mental Health Hospital was under federal investigation for mismanagement. We actually had our local hospital had a walkout among staff at the emergency department because mental health patients were piling up to the point at which it was dangerous to operate there. But the notion of justice ministry is not just simply to address symptoms, but actually to address the root problems that are creating these symptoms. And what we understood was the reasons we were seeing this lack of care is because we had inadequately supported our mental health system to the point at which people were ending up in crisis in the wrong places. Our jail was the dominant mental health service provider in our community, where people, if you can believe it, could walk in 24/7 and get care, our local jail. So we started to ask ourselves, well, there's got to be something better than this. And in fact, there is. In San Antonio, Texas, they had a jail that was at complete, was full, and they were thinking about floating a bond to build a second jail. And down there, they decided that actually a significant number of people that were in their jail were suffering from mental illness. So they decided about 15 years ago to invest in 24/7 mental health crisis care, like an emergency room, except instead of having a physiological problem, you could have a psychological problem and get care. We organized our police chief, our hospital, our district attorney, judges, county administrators, the shelter director, to travel with clergy down to San Antonio to witness what they were doing for ourselves. And it's nothing short of astounding what they had. This is a picture of the restoration center that they have in San Antonio, where anybody could be taken by law enforcement or by themselves into treatment 24/7. And depending on what you needed, you could either go the route of, upon intake, you could be taken into sobering beds and then offered immediate on-site addiction detox, which would lead you into transitional housing. If your illness or the issues that you were seeing were not due to addiction, but mental health, you could be brought into a calming area, stabilized for 72 hours under psychiatric care, and then transitioned into housing. And they actually did this 15 years ago, and they never built their second jail. And the jail that was full at capacity at the time of their consideration is now at half its capacity because they were diverting people from the carceral system into treatment. So we were convinced that this is what we needed to see in Lawrence, Kansas. And we were convinced that really the root of our problem that could ameliorate the symptoms that we were witnessing was to actually build a mental health crisis center in Douglas County. If you added up all of the budgets of our churches in Lawrence, we could not supply the necessary revenue to build and operate this crisis center. This was not a mercy ministry problem. This was a systemic injustice problem that was impacting every fifth family person in our community. So we knew we had a significant issue that we needed to deal with. We began to message our campaign within our congregations, and I was going to show you a nice, lovely video of how we depicted this, but for the sake of time, I won't. Instead, I'm going to get to this slide, which is really what brought the Mental Health Crisis Center into reality in Douglas County. We organized 4 assemblies over the course of 4 years, with 5,000 people of faith showing up in large numbers to support a mental health crisis center as an alternative to incarceration in Douglas County. Every single one of these pictures you see here is a different assembly with different authorities who had the ability, the head of our hospital, the mayor, our county commissioners being asked to throw their support behind the creation of a mental health crisis center. This led to a ballot measure in Douglas County to fund mental health crisis, which you can see the blueprint for it here, which passed by 71% of our voting electorate. So a quarter of a penny of sales tax is generating about $4.9 million annually in Douglas County, and is in perpetuity dedicated to provide mental health crisis, including addiction services and transitional housing. Justice Matters got the award for the National Alliance for Mental Illness of the state of Kansas for our work. We also had every single Lawrence police officer trained to understand behaviors that they encountered that had more to do with mental health than they did with criminality, so that they could start diverting folks away from our criminal justice system directly into treatment. I share that story with you not because I want you to understand that justice ministry organizations are mental health organizations. They're not. Mental health was the issue of justice that we surfaced in our first campaign. We have also pumped over $10 million into affordable housing. We have stopped a jail expansion twice in our county, once at the ballot box and now in the courts, in order to start bringing alternatives to incarceration to the forefront. All of these issues followed the same formula of listening to our community formally through house meetings, identifying the problems, engaging clergy and lay leaders into solutions, and then trying to organize large numbers of people to demonstrate broad public support for justice in our communities. Shanae, could you talk quickly about anything that the other issues that you've been surfaced and addressed in Topeka?
Yeah, I'll talk specifically about two particular campaigns. The first campaign is related to public transportation. So the stories surfaced in our house meetings were related to people feeling very limited in where they can go in late hours, but also geographically in our community. And tied to that was this concern that it limits job opportunity, specifically for marginalized communities. And so what we learned in our research is that Topeka Metro only runs within the city limits and from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So there are significant gaps in our public transportation system. And the one that we chose to take on as an organization was related to workforce-focused transportation. And so as a result of the research and gathering over 1,000 people, 1,200 people to be exact, and challenging our public transit system along with local decision makers for funding, we were able to win something that our public transit system has never done before, an unprecedented expansion by 2 ride-to-work programs. These ride-to-work programs take people from central Topeka, really anywhere in the city, but the research shows they're coming from central in East Topeka out to the outskirts of the county, both north and south. So the people who are living in the inner city, who have traditionally not have access to our major employers in the county, now have access to living wage jobs. Those programs in the first 2 years have been able to deliver 32,000 rides for members of our community who just want to get to work. So following the very same process, we've been able to win the establishment of those programs. And then secondly, we are on the pathway now to payday loan reform. What we know nationally is that 4 in 10 Americans have no savings to help them weather a financial emergency. In our house meetings, we surfaced stories about people who felt like their finances were always tight. And so when the car breaks down, when the AC goes out in the summer, they're making their way to a payday loan company because it is the most accessible to them and the easiest. And unfortunately, what we find is that people get into something that they thought was going to last for 2 weeks. And because of the way the system is built, they end up in that loan relationship, in a cycle of debt for, on average, half of a year. So a 2-week expectation becomes half of a year. And because of that, what we know is that in the state of Kansas, payday loans typically have a 391% interest on its borrowers. That is usury, that is unjust, unfair, and it is wrong. So we have taken a stand, and over the coming year, we expect to have legislation that for the state of Kansas that says that these payday loans will ensure that people have enough time to repay the loan in affordable installments over months and not weeks, and that the companies are limited in the payment amount to no more than 5% of each paycheck. It is our desire to keep a line of credit available for families who have nowhere to turn, but to maintain their human dignity and to provide a product that is fair and safe and affordable. And those are just two examples at Topeka Jump of what Topeka Jump is doing right now to do justice.
I want to thank Ben and thank Shanae. I would like to give, if anyone in our group would like to ask questions or have any clarifications, I would like to give you the opportunity to do so in the chat, and we would have both Ben and Shanae answer them at this time. Shanae, I know that the transportation, since I'm just recently only a year here in Johnson County, and I miss being speaking with y'all, but I know that the transportation made such a difference in the lives of so many in our community, because those without jobs could not get to the place where jobs were.
Yes.
And the work of Topeka Jump just made all the difference in the world.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I put questions in the chat box. Let's see. I'm gonna look.
Oh.
Affordable housing, transportation, and mental health are issues that we're all, okay, here they're coming. I love the impact that you're all doing. Who here in Wyandotte County are you connected to that we can connect with as well? And I know that is the work that we are going to need to begin. Ben, I guess this is somewhat more of a question for you. Are you with us at this moment? Ben may have stepped away for a second.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Pastor Roberson, I'm interested in working with you. I'm also working with Desmond Lamb, a number of other people to get started in building a justice ministry organization in Wyandotte, which is, this conversation is meant to be a primer for that. So I appreciate and in Johnson County, probably of the 66 clergy that are on this call, my guess is about 50 of them are from Johnson County. So the names, actually, the more you answer the question in the chat box, the more you'll probably get a sense for who's on this call. So yeah, keep answering these questions. We want to know what the issues are of justice that you're passionate about, what keeps you up at night worrying for your people, your shepherds of many. So what's keeping you up at night that you're hearing about, and what makes you righteously angry? So. And
I see from Bruce Draper, who I know is in Wyandotte, access to healthcare. And when I served in Wyandotte County, I know that was such a crucial issue for us at that time. And we were always trying to organize efforts to get healthcare in around the metropolitan UMC church. So what are the issues of justice that are passionate? Okay, so I want to be included in your Wyandotte County conversation. Dixie Junk from St. Paul's Episcopal and KCK, racial reconciliation, Medicaid issues, racial issues, unemployment issues. We have been in conversations recently on both sides of the Kansas City border, Kansas City, Mo, and Kansas City, Kansas. And we have been talking to pastors who have, and I know the Reverend Cheryl Bell has been invited to sit in some conversations with some organizations that would give us some connections with justice ministries that have already been organized on both sides of the border. to help us, and I know that she's going to be involved in our ministries here. From Father Greg, just comment, thank you, Shanae. He's been part of Topeka Jump and moving in Johnson County. Privileged to host a couple of the big Nehemiahs, and honestly, once those of us who are in Johnson County and Wyandotte County get to experience one Nehemiah assembly, and our people get to experience one Nehemiah assembly, we will understand how the power of God works through the great assembly of God, calling people to do work for the people of God so that all might experience justice. It's a powerful time of community.
And Lee, I see you saying we're not seeing the answers that people are given, so we're just going to keep them going. Karen Neihart talks about Medicaid issues, racial issues, unemployment issues. Kelly Demo, immigration is a huge issue in Johnson County. Tim Suttle, as we work to assist homeless folks who are members of my church and provide shelter for a growing problem in Johnson County. We keep getting shut down by municipalities, meet up against the roadblock of affordable housing.
And a problem in Johnson County is that they don't want homeless shelters.
Sure. Adrian Roberson, issues of justice here in Wyandotte, mental health, access to jobs, career training. Jeff Prothrow, community organizing, finding ways to help underrepresented groups gain a greater voice. Father Nick, immigrants from Latin America unable to build bonds with their own children due to language barriers. Parents are largely unable to keep up with them. Bruce Draper, African refugees, Swahili, experience of some generational challenges. Pastor Roberson, trying to engage us in a reconciliation conversation. Bill Scholl, I'm just throwing these out there so that
also have mental health challenges with the mental health services in Johnson County, which people would think is not true, but is still true here. Transportation issues exist in Johnson County as well as in Wyandotte County, although people would also not think that's true. Addiction detox in Johnson County is an issue. I think that part of one of the things that people in Johnson County would say about Johnson County is that everything is hush hush. We have the same issues, but nobody is willing to speak about them and acknowledge them.
Now I wanted to encourage us to, we have just listed what might feel like an overwhelming set of problems that we see in the cities in which we serve. The next question is, where's the church? Where's the synagogue? Where are we as believers on these issues of justice? Let's talk about where we are right now. If you could share using your chat, kind of how you, Shanae wonderfully talked about the difference between mercy and justice. What do you think we're doing right in the area of mercy? What can we do on issues of justice?
Stuart Curtright just mentions that Johnson County is the most resource county in Kansas, since it's right next to Wyandotte County, which is the most under-resourced county, adjacent to Jackson County, Missouri, and justice issues that keep him awake at night. And until Johnson County is willing to share its wealth and other resources, not much will change.
Dixie Junk is suggesting that we need to help work around immigration activities, aligning ourselves with other organizations. Brandon Champagne lifts up the fact that he's housed a young Native American man recently released from jail, having the hardest time getting his license and no guidance in jail on how to reintegrate back. Bill Scholl mentions the Catholic Church tries to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty by providing education. That's one thing we're doing right. That's great. Rabbi Katapan says we focus on social action, but not social justice. Our congregants don't seem to grasp the difference.
Mhm.
Please, we've got about 5 minutes before we want to invite Pastor Rivers. So let's just keep these conversations going. Pastor Roberson, Scripture talks about having a form of godliness, but then denying the power therein. The challenge we have in KCK is getting the church to realize the church is not a building, but the people.
Amen. And Reverend Ann Gatabo says we're good in doing mercy ministries and they make us look good and we pat ourselves on the back, but we shy away from confronting justice issues and often lay blame on the victim groups.
Yeah. Any other feedback about what you're witnessing in your community and how you're seeing the church respond, or the synagogue, people of faith? Bill Scholl, I think I forgot to mention, we have a parishioner in Johnson County who had to call 911 because her adult son had a psychotic episode. He needs mental health services, which he's not getting, but is getting caught up in the criminal justice system. Chris Ross says, even within Johnson County, there's need that is ignored. I've been attending meetings organized by OP, and when I've asked what we're doing to bring minority populations to the discussions, I question this and got no real answer. Tim Suttle, there's so many of us, little congregations, not wanting a shelter, especially in these times of more and more people becoming homeless. Debbie Hall, how do we push Johnson County not wanting a shelter, especially in times when more and more people are becoming homeless? As we are seeing these conversations unfold, or hearing about them and talking to each other, I just want to offer that that's what's so powerful about listening. We formally set aside 3 to 4 months to listen to our community, to identify what keeps them up at night, what they're worrying about, and then we engage them as people of faith, leaders in their congregations and in their cities, to understand not just the symptoms, but the root causes of those problems. That's what a justice ministry organization is formally designed to do. It's a vehicle for listening, understanding, and then acting in the public arena around issues of justice to address those. So I want to switch now to Nelson Rivers. Thank you, Shanae.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Bless
Really
you.
appreciate you being on.
Miss you.
Thank you.
Might be having trouble getting onto this call, so I'll be pulling up our agenda. And let's see. See how we're doing on time. I think we're still on time for this. Let's see. we will be switching over, it looks like, we'll be switching over to John Aeschbury. He's the director of the DART Center. He's going to walk us through let's see. Yeah, here we go. He'll walk us through the formation process of justice ministry organizations. John, you should be able to unmute your screen or unmute and start your video so that you can join us. John, how do we build justice ministry organizations? Where do we go from here?
Well, I just want to start with you listed out a whole bunch of problems in the chat room, and there are, in Johnson County, Wyandotte County, like many other communities across the country, there are deeply entrenched problems. Those problems didn't arrive kind of overnight, and they're not going to be solved overnight. And in the 23, DART affiliates across the country, people are making long-term kind of lasting transformational changes, but it happens over time. And it happens with kind of building a strong justice ministry organization. And so going forward, you'll want to be thinking about kind of four things that we engage. We have to engage a broad cross-section of people and from many different faith communities at different levels, and the clergy provide an important kind of level of leadership for this, for an organization to be successful. It has to be really a unique blend of clergy-led and lay leader-led. It's not one or the other. You have to have a kind of serious process for developing issues, kind of grassroots issues. And then there has to be money and there has to be structure. So, in this early phase, there's often a lot of interest to establish a going organizations. You'll need 20 or more, and more is better. Congregations that agree to kind of buy into forming a justice ministry organization. Congregations will buy in for a range of reasons. One is, out of the faith tradition. Bishop Saenz talked about the Exodus story, the prophets. Those of us in a Christian tradition, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says that the weightier matters of the law are justice, mercy, and faithfulness, or our other heroes in the faith, Martin Luther King and so forth, inspire us, challenge us to do justice. Congregations buy into the justice ministry, but because there are some very serious entrenched problems that can't be solved by mercy ministries, but only with kind of deeper systemic changes. And then others are also moved by the desire to reclaim a prophetic voice. Martin Luther King, in the letter from a Birmingham jail, said, if the church does not recapture its prophetic voice, it will risk becoming an irrelevant social club. And particularly in this era, what is our witness? What are we known for? And there's a crisis in many cases because a generation is losing faith that the church and doesn't just make statements, but is actually causing changes. So each county, in Johnson County, Wyandotte County, there's a critical mass. And so you need to get 20 or more congregations in each place bought in, and put some serious money into the process, raising $25,000 to $30,000 each from your congregations and other kind of local sources, because we can get some seed money, to get the organization started, but seed money goes away. And so financially, to sustain an organization, you'll want to build it so that through individual investments and congregational investments, and down the road, kind of getting business leaders to invest in the organization, you can raise your core budget from those kinds of sources, and that has to start from day one. But the other thing, that we keep in mind is it's also a way, when congregations put money into it, that's a way in which they demonstrate they're serious, about being involved in this kind of work. So beyond that, any organization has to have a basic structure, bylaws, officers, and an organizing plan. So over the next couple months, the idea would be that there needs to be a Constitution and Bylaws Committee. The organization would need to be incorporated, develop a budget, congregations start making commitments to financial commitments to be part of that. And then most of our organizations kick off with some kind of event where leaders are exposed to really the biblical principles. We have a session that we've designed to introduce people. It's called a Rethinking Justice Workshop. That's an opportunity to look at what scripture, the sacred texts from Deuteronomy, Ezekiel, and other texts kind of tell us about how we are to live in community. And then to tell some stories about what organizations like JUMP in Topeka, or Justice Matters in Lawrence, or in other parts of the country, what have those organizations, been able to accomplish? And it is incredible, what some of our groups are doing. In Louisville, Kentucky, the Clout organization pressed for a new kind of discipline program called restorative practices. And they're in the middle of a 5-year plan to implement restorative practices in all Jefferson County schools. And at Burkhart Elementary, as an example, the number of out-of-school suspensions went down by 83%. In Lakeland, Florida, 15 years ago, the organization pressed and won a 1/4 cent sales tax for indigent healthcare, and just recently got the county commissioner out of that source of money to allocate $12 million for mental health care. They've also pressed 10 years ago for the establishment of federally qualified or community health centers that are providing primary care for people who are left out of the system. So those kinds of transformations are very much possible if we take the time to build the structure and to engage people, because what makes our organizations different is that they're very serious about building the power of organized people to hold public officials accountable. Because even when you get officials who want to do the right thing into office, there are going to be countervailing forces who are benefiting already from the way things are. And those are questions of power. And to really resolve them, we have found that we need the power, and the power comes from organized people, to transform those systems and hold those officials accountable. That's kind of introduction to the basic parts of the formation process of a justice ministry organization. Ben, is that?
That's great. Thanks, John. I'm gonna turn it over to Pastor Rivers from Cajun in Charleston, South Carolina. He's gonna tell us a little bit about why he got engaged with Justice Ministry in his city and what it's meant for him.
Good morning. Thank you, Ben. Hey, John. I wanted to thank you for your work in all of this. Let me be expeditious as possible. I also have my own noonday Bible study starting shortly. To cut to the chase, I was approached by a friend. I have found that depending upon whether you have a heart for justice, whether it's a part of your biblical or your scriptural DNA, that helps. But whether you have none of that, if someone you know and trust and have worked with or have some relationship with approaches you, and you listen. I had a good friend who's still here, Reverend Joe Darby, AME pastor. I'm Baptist, and he sent John to us, John Dawkins, and he was organizing. And he came into my office at the church, and I was pretty confident that because of my social justice background, I spent 38 years with NACP, now I'm with the National Action Network with Reverend Sharpton. Pretty much thought I had it on lock. And while we have been preaching in my tradition from Nehemiah 2, Nehemiah 4, and Nehemiah 6, people that are mind to work, stay on the wall, John came in and talked about Nehemiah 5. You have chapter 5. And basically that 5 described an organization, Nehemiah coming into Jerusalem and finding that discrimination, oppression was running rampant. The folk who should have been doing things weren't. And there was a particular part of the text in Nehemiah 5 that he read to me. I went through the whole thing with him, and after he left, I read it again. And Nehemiah says in the 6th verse, when I heard their complaints, I was very angry. After thinking it over, I spoke out against these nobles and officials. And I told them, you're hurting your own relatives by charging interest when they borrow money. Then I called a public meeting to deal with the problem. And Nehemiah, by reading this text, showed me the power of mass meetings that have a program and a plan. As you know, across the country now, we have protests and marches. We've had several in Charleston, and I've been supportive of it. I've been amazed by it. And frankly, Ben and all those who are considering this is our season. If you cannot organize or can't find the reason to organize for justice now, you maybe never will, because the world and the country and your community is crying out for folk who want to fight for justice, work for justice, but know how to do it. And Charleston Area Justice Ministry was started as an idea in 2011. In fact, that was not even named in 2011. We were an interest committee. We were just getting together. And in 2 years, we'd organized in 2013 to become the Charleston Area Justice Ministry. And I say this without any fear of successful contradiction, that the Charleston Area Justice Ministry has been the most effective social justice movement among organized people, regardless of denomination, regardless of race, regardless of record, in our community in the last 7 years. There's no doubt about that. I think that the jury has come in, and that's the case. But how did it happen, and why did it happen? We must understand, to borrow a story I've told often for those who might know the work of Langston Hughes and his friend Anna Bontom back in the Harlem Renaissance. They wrote a book called Negro Folktales. For any preacher, it's a great source of wit and folklore and stories. They primarily have stories. There's one story of a black man who had formerly been an enslaved man, and he'd become very equipped with the whip and handling horses. And so he was taking who used to be his former slave master, now his boss, to town. And as he was going along with his whip in the wagon, he saw a bumblebee hovering over some flowers, and he hit the bumblebee with the whip and split it in half. And the man said, And then he went a little further and saw a horsefly on the back of a horse. And as he was about to alight on the horse, he took his whip again and smacked him, split the horsefly and destroyed it. Further on down the road, there was a hornet's nest in a tree. And when he got to the hornet's nest, the boss said, John, hold up a minute. He stopped and he said, you're so good with that whip, why don't you take it and snatch that hornet's nest out of the tree? And so John looked at the tree and looked back at him, and looked at the tree and looked back at him, and then finally said, No, sir, I don't think I'd do that. You see, they is organized. And his point simply was that organized people get more done. Organized people are more effective. And frankly, folk don't mess with people so much if they're organized. And so organization is what makes the Charleston Area Justice Ministry distinct and distinguished from all the others. And so much so that now other civil rights organizations with longer histories, other social justice movements with a longer time in the community, all point to CAJM as the way to get it done. Now, what really has to happen is some of the leaders have to be immersed in understanding that justice is God's call upon his people. Often in our community, we've been told that politics didn't belong in the church, which is, if you're Baptist, you know that's a joke. We elect everything. We elect deacons, we elect trustees, we even elect people to clean the church. So obviously politics is not our concern. Politics to do what is our concern. And a lot of people are afraid of confrontation. They want to go along and get along. And you can't do that. And in fact, I think that's adverse to preaching. So we started by organizing among ourselves across denominations, across racial lines, even across faith lines. And we came up with a core group of folk who spread the word throughout. You had to go through an orientation period that really reintroduces you to the text. A lot of us have read the gospel and read the Old Testament and read the Holy Word, but we read it through a lens not shaped by the word itself, but shaped by society, by pressure, by teaching. And so when you go back and look at the book of Micah and realize that God in his indictment against Israel came to the 6th chapter and 8th verse and said to them, now you know what you owe me. And he said, this is your whole obligation to me. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with me. And then if you go to the book of Matthew, and a lot of folk see Jesus as a very nice, gentle, and good guy that was mistaken, that he was mistaken and did not quite understood. And I argue differently. He was quite understood. They knew exactly why they hated him, and they knew exactly why they killed him. They had the wrong reason, but they killed him because he was a radical, because he was a subversive. He was going against not only status quo, but against the church, the faith itself. So in Matthew 23, verse 23, as you will note, that Jesus spends most of his time when he talks about leadership and power, he rails on against the leaders of the faith, the religious elite. And he told them in Matthew 23 that you make a lot out of your traditions, your tithing and all those things. He said, but you can do those things, but you should not do it at the expense of the weightier matters of the law. Well, what are the weightier matters of the law? Justice, righteousness, and mercy. On Jesus's list, justice is first. On God's list, justice is first. And in both cases, it's a verb, not a noun. It's not just a thing, it's an action. And so it's up to us to help people understand that. So what we were able to do, what really made CAJM and the DART system distinct and unique, is the amount of research, fact-based research that illuminates the problem, puts the problem in front of the people, and then when it's time, they'll be motivated to move because they're confident in the move. Now, at first, our first big Nehemiah action, I've been going to mass meetings all my life. I've been in civil rights now, I counted 45 years, starting as a 24-year-old young man. All I had was energy and anger. And I became the state director of the NACP for 10 years in South Carolina. I brought single member districts across the state. We increased the number of Black elected officials in South Carolina from under 50 to 380 by the time I left to go to Atlanta. I was regional director for 5 years in Atlanta. I became the national field director in 99 for the NACP nationally under Kwesi Mfume. Ben Jealous came, I became the vice president of stakeholder relations, dealing especially with the church. And in all those things, I've learned the power of preparation, persistence, and the courage of your conviction. But the mass meeting was unique in keeping momentum and really keeping us committed to what we're doing. It's an accountability system. It is how we stay committed, but it brings your congregation. The unique part of our work in DART and in Charleston Justice Ministry, we're congregation-based. congregation-based, congregation-based. Why is that so important? Any movement that's led by somebody with charisma, led by somebody who just knows what they're doing and can become popular and be better known than the movement itself, they are subject to loss, because if you take that leader out, the movement stops. Cajun has not stopped because it's not about one person. I want to make sure you understand that as you do this work, making sure your congregation is on board, that the congregation is sold out, that the congregation is believing in this, that's critical, because without it, you won't be able to sustain it. It's almost impossible for an entity, a single person, to keep up the work. For us, all the stuff John talked about before I got on, before he put me up, let me summarize with this. Everything we challenged ourselves to do in the first session of Nehemiah, we had officials who change their mind on the stage. The sheriff changed his mind on the stage. The superintendent changed her mind on the stage. And all those things we talked about, from ending the way teenagers are being incarcerated in our community, the highest percentage of teenagers being stopped and locked up by police were 80% Black teenagers. We stopped that. It's down now to in the neighborhood of 20% or less. We dealt with this issue of education. They didn't have pre-K special spots in our schools. They said no. We went from no spots to 400 spots. Has transformed the way our children are educated. And the list goes on. We even got the issue of labor theft, people wages being stolen. We got the county to set up a whole office for a year to deal with wage theft complaints. All of those things became possible because we would not quit. We were prepared when we went, and we had the principles of our faith to shore us up and be a foundation for what we did. I would encourage you to do it. I would encourage you to learn how to do it. I would encourage you to be confident and then be prepared. Don't be skeptical of success. Don't think it's a fluke. Don't think it happened only because the season was right. No, if you work hard enough, you will make the season, and you'll make the season right. This is our time across the country. People are looking for who has the answer about equity, justice, and ending racism and oppression, especially against the folk like me who got here at the beginning and made America what it is. So I'm glad about it. Anything I can do to help, anything I can do to co-sign what Ben is working on and what John is talking about, call me, invite me. I'm honored to be with you. I know it works. I have the scars to prove it, but I also have the success to prove it. God bless you. Excited about it. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, press on, press on, press on. And when you're about to quit, press on anyhow.
Thank you, Pastor Rivers. We know you got a Bible study to get to, so thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Look forward to talking to you again. Thank you all.
Amen. Hallelujah. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Candea, and I serve as the Bishop of the Central State Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And I am so delighted that so many of you are participating. As you have heard throughout this hour or so, this is important work. This is the work of people of faith. This is why we are here as communities. And so my responsibility in this time is to invite you to continue to reach out to colleagues, to other clergy. There is a poll where you can take to invite others to the next meeting on August 19th. You see it on the screen from 9:30 to 11. As you've heard, the problems are vast, but so is the momentum we have as people of faith. And imagine being able to do the kind of work in our counties, in our area, that we've heard happens across in other places. So I wanted you to think for a moment about who are some people that you can invite. And don't worry if they might be on this call or whatever. Ben, he's great at following up. He will see those people that are duplicates. They won't get multiple invitations. But we would really like to, for this important work, expand the base. There's lots to do. We need a lot of people at the table. So again, think about people that you can invite. It doesn't just have to be people within your own denomination. Maybe this would be a time for you to actually go across the street and introduce yourself to other faith communities and see about joining together in this important work. So take a moment to think about who you might invite. And then Ben, I'm going to need your help. What kind of instructions do we need to give people on how to do this?
Honestly, as long as you participate in the poll, just indicating who you would be willing to invite, it automatically will let me know what you've suggested, and then I will be following up with you personally to let you know who's already been around the table, brainstorm with you, others that we should be thinking about. And the idea is, we know there's strength in numbers. We know, as Pastor Rivers said, this is a different season where justice is on the minds of lots of clergy. And we just want to expand this table for our next gathering that we will likely be doing virtually on Wednesday, August 19th. In a minute, Dean Compier will be leading us in evaluation. So this poll will close in the next 40 seconds, I think. So feel free, if you haven't already, to just think about how many of your peers would you be willing to contact to make a personal invitation. And I'll give you materials on how to make that invitation. We didn't get to this meeting of nearly 70 pastors and clergy and bishops alone. We had 16 people a month ago plan this meeting. So
Thank you, Ben. And again, we see the difference that it makes as we continue to reach out to one another. And I would echo all the things that have been said. This is the time. This is the time to press on, to press on, to press on. And this excites me and energizes me as a faith leader to focus our purpose. I know it's hard work. We need each other. And so I'm excited to be part of this and invite you to think about who you can bring to the table to share this important work at this important time.
And I think Dean Compier is listed as Dixie Junk. So I think that's right. Let's see. If not, I'm not sure. Dean, are you operating?
I think
That's not Don.
Okay, all right.
I may be appearing as the other Dixie Junk because
Okay, there we go. I recognize Don's a colleague, and so glad to.
The other Dixie Junk is here, but I won't.
there I am.
Here's the part that's wonderful about these kinds of meetings. Thank you. And thank you again all for accepting this invitation and reaching out to your colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Or thank you, Bishop Candea. Take it away, Dean.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be called Dean because I do head a school for ministry in Topeka that serves this area, but for the purposes of this meeting, I'm associate clergy at St. Michael's and All Angels and Mission. And so I'm very happy to share with all of you. This is a time for some evaluation of this meeting. We want to learn every time so that we can be more faithful and meet your needs and concerns at our next meeting. So here's a form that you can look at, which asks you to indicate which things are most helpful to you. But we also want to make sure that you know that you can share any suggestions on the chat function right now or later. We're always very glad to hear from you. So if you would take a moment to ponder this evaluation, and if you want to share additional comments on the chat function, that would be great.
And just to kind of review the agenda, we heard from Bishop Saenz of the Great Plains United Methodist Conference. Shanae Holman described and unpacked for us some of the biblical inspiration and contrasting the difference between justice and mercy. I helped do a walkthrough on the case study here in Lawrence. Unfortunately, we switched to a webinar format. We'll probably switch back to a regular meeting so that we can break out and have small group discussions. Pastor Rivers gave a reflection of his experience as a pastor in Charleston, and then John Aeschbury described more of how you begin forming. So feel free to go ahead, and we'll take another maybe 45 seconds to take this poll in, and then Don, if you could close us in a word of prayer.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
This prayer was written by my colleague, Reverend Kelly Demo, who had to unfortunately step away, but I'll be sharing her words with all of us. Gracious and loving Creator, we thank you for our fruitful time together. Thank you for the potential for new friendships and new alliances in your name. Justice is what you demand. So bring us together and bring together all the peoples around you. Guide our work, drive our will and passion for justice, and calm our minds with the constant knowledge that you are God and we are not. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody. Have a blessed day. Again, my name is Ben MacConnell, and I will be following up with everybody on this in preparation for our next gathering on August 11th. And really appreciate the feedback and the discussion. Got a lot of work to do. Bye-bye.